All right. Welcome, Jason. Welcome, everyone. We are about to start the webinar, Get Started with Structured Data and Schema.org.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited.
Cool. All right. So you have the control of the slides, and we can get started.
Oh, okay. Really? Oh, can I just say who I am?
Of course, there is actually a slide dedicated to you, but
Oh, is that?
yes.
Oh, in that case, I'm very sorry. That was terribly rude of me. Right, off we
No.
go. First slide.
Um,
Sorry, I'm trying to. There you go.
there you go. All right. So, why are we doing this? That's the real question we're starting with. I see people coming in the chat. Hello, everyone. All right. So we are here with Jason Barnard, and we will have a dedicated slide so that he will introduce himself. But we'll start with understanding why we are doing mappings and between schema.org and content model. Why we are putting together these two things, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I love this. You're the one who wrote the list. And I love it because it's exactly a little explanation of what's happening. In fact, is that I had a site with my podcast episodes on it, and I had this plan to link my podcast to the events that I recorded the podcasts at, to the guests, to the topics, and to me. And I built a bespoke system. And the bespoke system, Andrea's just seen my PHP code. My bespoke system was really, really, really badly coded. And it was getting very difficult to manage, and I wasn't doing it very well. And then I talked to Andrea and realized that WordLift are already doing what I was trying to do, and they do it so much better than I would do it. So I switched my site from my bespoke system to WordPress just so that we could do this test. I switched it back in January. We started the test this month, and the idea was that to boost SEO, and if I may go through this, the idea was to stand out on search with improved markups. I like that phrase. It's getting my podcast out there with better presentations in the SERPs. I mean, as we get less and less clicks in the SERPs, it's increasingly important to be well presented every time we're there. And this markup is really going to help with that. Helping Google understand, and that's an interesting one, is that I got myself in the knowledge graph as a musician and as a blue dog and a yellow koala in a cartoon series, which sounds weird, but it's actually quite logical. I did voiceovers for cartoons, so I pushed that to get in the knowledge graph. And now I'm trying to get Google to understand that I'm more of a digital marketer. And part of that was to say, I have relationships with all of these people, including Andrea, Bill Slawski, Dawn Anderson, and with the events, SMX West. I was at SMX West, and I'm trying to communicate that to Google so that it understands that I'm not just a double bass player and a blue dog. I'm a digital marketer and a serious human being and reasonably intelligent. So the idea was to get Google to understand this by getting it to understand my website, which is really focusing on the podcast because it creates it doesn't create those relationships. It presents those relationships in a way Google can understand. But my problem was it wasn't doing it well enough. And the idea with this content-based entity structure model, which Andrea is going to tell us about, is a really good way of explaining it. And creating those multiple entry points, I was trying to rank also for these people's names. And I'm not doing a very good job. I've got on page 2 for John Mueller from Google. And I'm expecting to get onto page 1 with WordLift because I actually made the content to see if I could do it. So I've got to a certain point, but I can't get it any further. And I need structured data, well-structured data, and intelligently interlinked data, more importantly, to show which content is which content is talking about what and is linked to whom and how all these things link together. The second is improve the information architecture. And I love this first one because Andrea wrote it, help us to understand our own content. And what I realized when we did this is I hadn't fully understood what content I had and the value it had. So some of the things I've just said aren't things I was thinking last year. They're things I've been thinking since Andrea forced me to think about what is the content I've got? How does it all link together? What can I do with it? Improving user engagement, lovely. Get people into the site and get them interested in the content by presenting it better. Add internal links. I'm rubbish at internal linking. I think there are two problems with that. One of which is I think we're all lazy. And the other of which is we don't necessarily remember which episode goes with which. And I'll be very precise about that. I've got 120 episodes that I recorded in a year. And the problem is you don't remember what goes with what and what should link to what. And the beauty of what's happening now is that it suggests what should be linking to what, which is beautiful. Favor content re-referencing. Provide context and improve the user experience with context cards and recommendations. What I've got and what I think we've suddenly realized, I've got a page for each person, a page for each podcast, and a page for each event. And that all makes sense, but they're not linked together. And if I'm talking about Perna Virji, who we'll talk about later on, who works at Microsoft, who did a wonderful episode on the podcast, people don't necessarily know who she is because they might have found the page through searching for using search to analyze your competitors, which is what she talks about. And if they come across something, but who is Perna Virji? I can say she works at Microsoft and that's great. But if you if you mouse over her name, you can actually see her photo. So you get a good idea of who she is. And you see my explanation of who she is a bit more detailed. So it gives them context, and keeps them on board and keeps them, in this case, more interested in the content she's actually talking about. So I love all of that. Andrea is going to tell about this because I've got no idea what it means.
So that's the results that we want to bring Jason to. It's actually the results of a client that it's following us today in the webinar. So hello, Samer. We are happy to have you with us today. In these terrific blog, which is called Free York, that talks about design. We've been working for many years with WordLift, and we never unlock the indexation of the entity pages, because entity pages can be used. WordLift creates these pages in order to provide user with more context, as Jason was saying, but they can be used just as data points inside a structured data. They don't need to be visible to search engine. But as Sam was approaching the new year, he decided to replace his SEO plugin. And I'm not gonna say that what is switch off and what is switched on, but by doing this, he started to enable the indexation of the entity pages that he had created over the years with WordLift, and he had an amazing results in terms of traffic. So go to freeyork.org, visit the website, and that's the results that we want to bring to Jason by structuring the content on his site.
And something just struck me is he turned it on January the 11th, realized it on January the 13th, turned it off, then thought about it, realized it was a really good thing and turned it back on again.
Well, it was quite sudden, and the numbers were really huge, and we didn't understand it in the first place. We didn't know, what might have caused it. So it took a couple of experiments, but then we realized that his business model could change, and he could actually provide visibility for the artists that he has been blogging about for many years now.
I think that's beautiful. I'm expecting, not for quite a hockey stick like that, but I would expect this plugin to push my visibility and click-throughs down. Up, sorry, excuse me. Oh dear, that was the wrong way around. So,
all right. So now we can finally introduce Jason, and I think that Jason has already introduced himself, but we love to experiment with Jason. That's the most interesting part. I don't know if you like it, Jason, but we love to experiment with you.
No, I love it. And I was saying earlier on is there's confusion about who I am and what I do. I've got the musician hat and the cartoon maker and a voice actor and a digital marketing consultant. And I've been messing with my knowledge graph presence at my brand SERPs. If you type my name into Google now, Jason Barnard, you will see it's incredibly rich. I've got the Twitter boxes. The podcast actually comes up as podcast boxes. I've got the knowledge graph. I've got images. I've probably got videos, depending on where you are. I've been working on that really hard, and it's really good fun but it made me realize how ambiguous all of this or confused it can all be. And what I'm hoping is this experiment with Andrea and WordLift will help clarify to Google what my principal occupation is today.
Yeah, the experiment here that I did, it was to actually read your brand SERP, which is super rich, but of course it's ambiguous because you have so many things to say and that you like to do and that you're expert of. And so here I ran a language model in order to compress the top 10 results for the keyword JSON Barnard, and that's what the computer sees.
Oh, right.
Out of your
Okay,
SERP.
no, sorry, I was reading it. I thought you'd just written it.
No.
But that's amazing because it is very accurate. It covers all of my jobs, which were actually jobs. Sorry, I'm putting it in inverted commas, but in fact, I was a professional musician, a professional cartoon maker, and a professional voice actor, which is part of the problem. Is that it's not just things I like to do, it's things that I did professionally. And so Google has hooked onto that because obviously I've released records and I've had TV series on TV listings online. So ITV International released the cartoons. So that's kind of very, very authoritative sources that are saying very specific things. And obviously Google with the Knowledge Graph, one of the first things it got its hooks into was movies through IMDb and other databases, music through the fan sites, and music brains and so on and so forth. So these are exactly the areas where Google got very good very quickly with the Knowledge Graph. So my advantage was getting in quickly because of that. The disadvantage is it's now tainted me for life, is that's what I'm now associated with. But the description is great because it also talks about what I'm currently doing, and interesting enough describes what I'm doing in a way that I would describe myself. And it adds at the end, he also plays double bass with bar acoustic, which I love because I was a professional musician, but I still play music and I still love it. And I'm still in a group. So it's nailed it. Brilliant.
That's good. That's good. I mean, so we have to resort to AI in order to make a summary of JSON because he has so much to say.
Okay, I think I'll be using that for my blurb on all my profile pages from now on.
Good.
Okay.
So this webinar is coming after a webinar that I did a few weeks back with Cruce Saunders from Simple A about content modeling, and this webinar about content modeling was really the introduction that brought us here today to see, in real life, in a real world, on JSON website, what can content modeling bring and how does it work. So content modeling is about representing different types of content and elements and their attributes and their interdependent relationships. That's the definition that Cruce has left us, which is is full of meanings.
Yeah, that's a very short phrase with an awful lot of depth of meaning. I mean, I saw that webinar and I was astonished. And what I love about it is he's saying organize your content when you start doing it, and not only will your content make more sense to yourself, but you will start creating content that makes sense within its own little echo environment. And I'm hoping what will now happen once we've done this experiment and it's run its course a little bit, is that I'll start thinking more about what I'm talking to people about, because I will tend to make things fit together. We have, I think, perhaps as human beings, or at least I do, that tendency to think, how does this next bit fit into what happened before? But right now I don't have a clear view of what went before, and I need that, and this is where it's going to help. So I'm looking forward to that.
Good. So let's try to see. I mean, content modeling. It's about, of course, building structure content. And but the way that we do it with WordLift is that we plugged in schema.org. Now schema.org is a vocabulary that helps computer understand things of the world, and so there is this very nice definition of Jenny Schmidt from Intuit that says that schema is a multitasker. And she means that we can not only use schema for helping search engine understand the content, but we can use schema to inform the content strategy.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So Now, this is kind of the building blocks of content modeling. What is a content model made of? And the content model is made of a content type, which is composed by elements. So imagine an article, JSON, like the one that you have on the blog, as a content type. And then the elements would be the title of the article. And the attributes would be, the rules that we specified for the title to say, hey, it shouldn't be longer than, 160 characters or whatever. So we have the content type, we have the elements that are the constituents of this content type, and then we have the attributes of the elements. And then all of these, it comes into views. So a web page is a view, but also a slider on the home page is a view. So whatever renders on an interface is a view. And then we have this super interesting concept from Cruce content modeling information that are the MixIns. Now the MixIns it's a concept it's a concept that comes from the development world. So it's something that extends our class. So if I have a class, if I have a content model, I can use a MixIn to extend it. Okay, and that's exactly what we're going to do today using schema.org.
Brilliant stuff. And sorry, back to my PHP code. Once again, it's rubbish. And that idea of extending classes is something I know I should do, but I don't. And it's exactly the same with my content. It's things that I should be doing, but I'm not. And I am now going to do it thanks to this experiment.
That's it. So content type, a unit of content. So in JSON case, the unit is the podcast. And of course, as he said, I mean, that's the most important activities that he's been doing in the field, helping us understand, what digital market is in 2020 by collecting, the contribution from so many people around the world. So the elements, it would be, the podcast title, the description of it. So these are the elements of the content type. And then the attributes are, what specifies the element. So if we start talking about schema, I can have a relationship that, for instance, connects the podcast with the contributor and links the podcast with a person. So I have an entity type person that is connected with the entity type podcast. And then the views are the representation of it, what we bring on the interface, what we bring to the user. It can be a context card, it can be a web page, it can be a CTA. And the MixIns are these ways in which we can extend the content model using external languages like schema.org. In WordLift, we also use other vocabulary like Dublin Core. And this allows us to have the flexibility to tell the things that we want to tell with our content to machines, but also we can use this knowledge to create a better user experience.
Yeah, what struck me about what Cruce was saying is that obviously we're looking to communicate with machines. And once again, I'm repeating myself, but I love the idea is it made me take a step back and think about the content. So it taught me a lot about what I was doing myself.
Yep. So that's what we use at WordLift. So we call it the entity-based content model, which is actually a MixIn, right? So it's a content model that has been, expanded with schema. So that's why I put here run DMC and always, long life to run DMCs. But so that's the entity-based content model. It's the MixIns that WordLift uses in order to expand a content model. So content type, elements, and attributes. That's the content model basic architecture. When we add the MixIn of schema.org, this becomes an entity type, like a podcast, a property, and a data type. And so this would be a podcast episode, for instance, the connection with the property director, and then, once again, JSON as a schema person that is the director for that entity. And then we can see the instance of it. So, the podcast that we were referring to about Purna Virji, where JSON is the director. So we are, using the MixIn of schema in order to shape our content model.
And what's interesting there, the title, I systematically put the name of the person in the title. And for us as human beings, we immediately see that Purna Virji is a person, I'm a person. But Google doesn't necessarily see that Purna Virji is a person, doesn't necessarily know which one we're talking about, and doesn't know what role she plays in the podcast episode.
Yep. There is more. So let's try to explore a little bit. So we start with one page. That's what Jason had already before we WordLifted his website. He had this one page. He had a lot of how many?
Sorry, 120
100?
episodes. But
Yep.
you just used the verb WordLifted to WordLift.
Yeah, we do.
Brilliant. Okay, so my site has been WordLifted. Love it.
That's it. So we started with one page, and but inside these pages, as Jason was saying, the title was already rich enough to tell a longer story than what it could fit inside one specific page, which again was unstructured, and now it's becoming structured. And how we're structuring it, we're structuring by adding a connection with another page that represents the person. And this is not only a page, but there is also data behind that links, the first page with a contributor on the second page. And then, of course, the production company, which is Calicube, that it's Jason company. So we have 3 pages, and then we're starting to add more pages as during the podcast, some topics are covered. So, affiliate marketing, brand SEO, these are topics that matters for the series, and that are also represented as web pages, but are indeed data point.
Yeah, and just looking at that, it makes enormous sense in terms of just the content that I've got and defining what the content should be, and defining how it all mixes together. And that's as far as I had got, and it wasn't defined explicitly. It was just, as you said, I got the name in the title, and that for me was enough.
Right. So these now are becoming a structure. And then you see that there is also a bunch of metadata. So we have a page, we have a pillar content, and then we start to expand it. And what we expanded with, for instance, the contributor page, and then we expanded with whatever topic has been covered during the podcast. And then we start adding information that we can reuse inside the content model, such as, this is part of the series, and most importantly, this has been recorded in an event. So we're creating a connection, a data connection between the event where the podcast has been recorded, the podcast, and the contributor. And all of this is coming into one specific content model that has been designed around the podcast episodes. And all of these, again, it comes into triples. So the subject, the predicate, and the object can be the podcast, the contributor, and the person that is contributing to that specific podcast. And all of these at the end, it will it's becoming a knowledge graph. And the reason WordLift creates a knowledge graph is that a knowledge graph, it's the simplest way to programmatically model content inside a specific domain. So in terms of workflow, I will quickly take the screen and show you practically how this works. So we start from the content. We apply the mappings. So we define exactly what elements are mapping to what property in the schema vocabulary. And then we go and publish this knowledge graph. And then this knowledge graph is used and consumed by WordLift itself to produce the JSON-LD that is injected in the page. So, all right, now you should see my screen, and I'm just gonna show you a podcast here that is the one that, as you can see, belongs to the podcast series. I'm on the staging side, Jason, so don't worry. I'm not making any harm on production. We are already pushing this very far with you, so I'm just gonna run it on stage. And it's super simple because we have used the taxonomy inside the blog in order to activate a plugin that is called Advanced Custom Fields that if you're using WordPress, you probably know already. Most of you already use it. And with advanced custom fields, we can create the fields that represent the elements for our own entity of podcast. And now every time that JSON will classify a post into the podcast series category, these fields will appear. And you can see here that we have the different fields that they will help JSON structure the content on his site. And the only part that we had to do after creating the fields was to activate this functionality here that is called mappings. Now it's a new menu. You don't see it yet. We're testing it on a few sites, including JSON. And here you can see that if I go into the mappings and not into the settings, with WordLift, I can simply get the properties that I have created with advanced custom fields and map it to whatever property and whatever class I have in schema. And this will only be done when post will be marked by JSON as belonging to the podcast series category. So it's super simple, and we are automating this part so that starting from a class, WordLift will get the data from schema, and then will create the fields for you. So now it's still a semi-manual process, but we're working to automate these so that you will just say, hey, this is going to be a podcast episodes, and WordLift will take it from there, creates the fields, and structure the content. And now I pass it again to you, Jason, so that we can resume the presentation.
Okay, brilliant stuff.
All right.
Okay. I mean, this diagram here, content schema mapping, content enrichment, data publishing, data exploitation, and SEO, reminds me of what I saw from Cruce. It makes so much sense, and it makes even more sense now because it's not just an intellectual exercise for me to see it and to understand how it works. I can actually see how it works, and I'm about to see how effective it can be, especially on that last one, which is exploiting the data and getting that SEO and getting that visibility. And as we said earlier on, the improved visibility, which is incredibly important to me and my brand, CaliCube, as I move forward. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I was just reading some of the comments. It was like there is a video agency that is saying, so you're creating what Google would call a custom knowledge graph. That's exactly what we're doing here. We are creating a custom knowledge graph, and the reason we're doing this is that we want to make sure that Google understands the content in the best possible way, but we also want to have the control that is required for us to control, the visibility that we get.
Brilliant stuff.
So that's the representation of the structured data that now it's coming out of your pages, Jason. And it's been automatically written for you by WordLift without you messing up with PHP code.
Thank you. You saved me and the PHP world a lot of pain.
I have a question for you, Jason, that is coming from Matteo. That of course there is an evil part in these, right? Because Matteo is commenting. Now I want to map everything, and how do we control what we should structure? Because it's going to take a lot of time to structure everything.
Well, what I find interesting about that is that my first reaction is that exactly what he says. I see this and I think, oh, I could add that and I could do this and I could do that. And it's very difficult to do, but I think it's really important for all of us in whatever we're doing in life is to say, don't get carried away too quickly. Start with what's absolutely necessary. Get it perfect. I mean, Rand Fishkin, I remember reading an article by him talking about cupcakes and wedding cakes. And he was saying, don't try and make the biggest wedding cake in the world because it will be rubbish and it will fall apart. Make little cupcakes that are every cupcake is perfect. And when you join them all together, they will make a wedding cake. And I like that. I like the way he talks about it, just from that point of view, and that's stuck with me for a few years now. And so here, what we've done, and what I like about it, is we said, okay, we've got the podcast episode, we're going to focus on that. And I immediately said to Andrea, let's really get jiggy with the people, and let's get jiggy with the event. And he said, no, slow down. We'll do the podcast and the people because that's the focus. Then we can add the events as a second stage. And he's 100% right. And when you look at this thing on the right, the podcast episode going through, you can see how easy it is for a machine to understand it because we've got those name value pairs. But even for me reading it, I mean, I actually read these and I look at them because it pushes through to me in a very structured manner that my brain can deal with very easily exactly what it is I've got in each one of these podcast episodes. And I think, as we were saying earlier on, it will help me to develop my content strategy over time because the picture in my head will be clearer.
Cool. Yeah. So we have to draw the line at some point. So that's another one actually for you. But it's interesting because so Google understands intents with the help of entities. So Google interprets the query of the users and tries to understand the intent behind the query using the entities. So if we kind of jump on the other side, how can we expand this content to intercept these intents? I mean, what role does the entity-based content model plays to inform the content strategy? What do you think, Jason, here?
Well, I mean, you're talking about intent. I mean, we're talking about RankBrain, which is aiming to improve its understanding of intent. And then the opposite side of that is understanding the content itself and understanding, I mean, if it's going to match the two intents, it has to have a similar understanding of both ends. So from this point of view, if somebody's saying, I'm looking for Purna Virgi, and it's clearly understood that Purna Virgi is present on my site in one form or another, obviously that intent is much easier for Google to match with me personally, as opposed with somebody else.
Yeah, I think also yesterday we kind of realized as we were talking the fact that if we look at the Wikidata graph for your entity, I was getting a picture that wasn't exactly the picture that you wanted me to see. And so we jumped on, and now actually, you know, the representation that we have is Jason as a digital marketer rather than Jason as a songwriter, a singer writer, a screenwriter, a voice actor, which we were seeing before. So there are so many facets around an entity that our content models should actually design around the facet that we want to promote and bring forward.
No, sorry, I love that, and that was the conversation, as you rightly said yesterday. I want to promote myself as a digital marketer because that's how I'm making a living today. I like being a singer-songwriter, a screenwriter, a voice actor, and a musician. I think that's cool, but it doesn't actually bring me anything today in terms of my personal brand making money moving forward with my career. And I had realized yesterday talking to you that the digital market didn't come in, and it's because I hadn't put it in Wikidata, which is foolish of me and stupid of me. But what this experiment once again is doing is making me focus on what's the most important. What's most important for me now isn't saying, aren't I cool because I was a blue dog, which I love saying, but do you want to work with me as a digital marketer, because that's where my career is now going.
That's correct. All right, so here, here's an example that allows us to see, for instance, inside a graph like Wikidata, you know, what are the facets around search engine optimization. And I don't know, Jason, if you can click on that link, but we can explore a little bit of this graph. There is a link below.
Sorry, excuse me. All right, brilliant.
So there's a link
can I click play?
Do please.
Ooh.
So here we have a graph that it's built with by traversing, you know, everything that is connected with search engine optimization. And I think it's interesting because it provides you an understanding of what you know, what revolves around that entity, and it gives us an idea on how we could expand, you know, potentially our content model if we want to talk about SEO. And we can see that it's a human activity, it's a process, and And it has to do with marketing. What else, Jason, do we see there?
No, yeah, I was pulling out behavior. It's human behavior and activity, which you just said. Sorry, I was actually just playing with it, which is very rude of me. And it's structured. Oh, we've got the word structure.
Yeah, good.
Structure linked to system and entity. And then whatever that says, economic branch. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
Marketing.
Oh, it's a system within the economic branch, which is part of the marketing. Brilliant. That's so easy to understand.
Yeah. So this is give us ideas on how we can shape the content model in order to cover the facets around a specific entity, because again, we are putting an entity at the center of our content model. So we want to understand, where are the different facets that we want to cover. And this is an exploratory way in which we can understand it.
Okay. And the whole thing starts with the human action.
Yeah, always.
Beautiful. Oh, how lovely. Okay. Sorry, back to the presentation.
Yep.
There you go. Sorry, I skipped forward.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So that's a technical SEO that I'm sure that Jason has interviewed. Did you, Jamie Alberico?
Not yet. No, I've been looking forward to the blue hair, but I'm definitely going to try and catch up with her now.
Because she's super brilliant, and she made a presentation a while ago where she said the more facets you cover, the more you become authoritative for that specific entity. And I think that Jason has knows a lot about brand SERP, which is exactly this, becoming authoritative for our own entity.
Yeah. Okay. Which I mean, and that was we were talking about it just before the webinar. Is people tend to think I'm necessarily incredibly authoritative about my own entity, and then you look at some brand SERPs and they're very clear and they're very accurate, and some brand SERPs are less clear and less accurate, and that comes down, from what I understand, to a lack of authority about oneself.
Cool. So we have a. Yeah.
Sorry, excuse me. I was just talking about the idea that you can, by being an expert or an authority on yourself, you can actually affect greatly what Google will show when somebody searches your brand name or your personal brand name. We were talking about that yesterday as well. I mean, I love that idea. It's exactly what I'm trying to do with brand SERPs, but from a very visual point of view as opposed to an analytic point of view that you're using. Sorry, go ahead.
No, we just have a question from Vinish Garg that is asking, does it work with complex interfaces such as for a dashboard? So content modeling would work for any interface, really. As we said at the end, a dashboard is a view. So if we want to create a dashboard for the podcast of Jason, totally we can use the content model and mix the elements in such a way that we can provide an overview of what the industry is talking about. That's also something that we didn't do yet, but we can definitely do.
Yeah, sorry, that actually brings me back to part of it. Is I'm trying to create in Google's mind the idea that I'm an authority on digital marketing, and this is one way of doing it. Which is the podcast is linked to all these people who are authorities themselves, talking about topics which are very central to digital marketing, and me at the center with my company at the center should theoretically give that impression to Google that I am authoritative within the digital marketing space as an entity.
I think you're succeeding in that. Also, we have another question that I think it's worth being answered. How should a basic blog content model work besides enriching it with entities? That's a good point, because of course we started with Jason's site, and Jason had a very specific piece of content at the core, which is the podcast, right? But in a common blog, at the core, what do we have? And that's an interesting question, and I think that it kind of makes me think of what Jason just said. I mean, we have to focus on something that really matters, right? We cannot be dragged by different structures. And so my answer here is it's a very simple one. What is the business goal behind that blog?
Oh, sorry. There's just something just occurred to me. Actually, sorry. With the blog, in fact, this whole approach is incredibly powerful because simple blog. What I tend to see with my clients is you look at the blog and they think, oh, I'll write about that today, and then they'll write about that tomorrow, and I'll write about, and it's all fragmented and it doesn't all join together. But if you've got an entity-based content model, you're immediately thinking, if I write about that today, how does that link into all the other things? Will it fit in, and will I be able to use all these opportunities that WordLift gives me to link all these entities together? And I would imagine, and I made the point very briefly earlier on, that in my podcast example, it will help me decide what I should be talking about next. And for a blog, it helps you make sure that all of your blog articles fit together like a kind of jigsaw puzzle and make a picture, a clear picture that Google can see and understand. And in fact, I believe as a user, as a person, as I read through the content, even though I don't know it, that picture's building up in my mind too. And that makes me as a human being feel that the company or the blogger that I'm faced with is more authoritative because they built this picture of an entire situation or an entire subject matter. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, modeling the subject matter, it's doable in the blog. But I think the other point is that for you, the podcast is kind of has been a pivotal point because you started now, from that kind of create services around and create consultancies around. And so the next content model for JSON, for instance, it would be the course, because JSON is providing courses. And so now that we have structured the podcast, we have the blog content around it, and we have the entities that kind of describe it. But now we want to create a connection with the course, because if you're listening to a podcast related to the BrandSEP, you might want to take a course that is related to BrandSEP. So you want to look at the business perspective and structure it with the content model, and the entity-based content model helps you doing that.
Brilliant. And my podcast then is keeping great company in terms of entities.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of the exploitation. So how do we exploit? How do we use these structured data? Okay, we have created better markup, and we have better interface because now we have more data presented also to the user. We have the context cards that provide context to the user for instance, presenting the contributor to someone that might not know. So how do we further use the data that we have inside this custom knowledge graph that we are creating? And we do this using an approach that an algorithmic approach that helps us turn the graph into math, into a continuous vector space. So we get the entities from JSON's knowledge graph, and we get the relationship between these entities, and we create vectors that the neural networks can process. So we want to get the knowledge graph from JSON blog into a form that we can use, for instance, for creating recommendation. We want to get this knowledge graph into a form that can help JSON, for instance, understand that I might be friend of another speaker, even though maybe JSON doesn't know it in the first place. So there are hidden patterns inside the data that we create with our sites that we can explore with this approach. So I'm going to just switch back to my computer and show you a little demo of the embeddings that I have created with the knowledge graph that we are building for JSON websites. So this is a tool that it's part of the TensorFlow suite of tools that is called Embedding Projector. So this is a way of visualizing the embeddings. So embeddings are vectors. So we have the entities from the graph and the relationship between these entities, and then now we have these embeddings, and now here we are visualizing these embeddings with this tool that it's called embedding projectors. So here I'm going to start with our friend Gennaro that has been participated to one of the podcasts of JSON, actually a couple at least, and you can see that by analyzing these embeddings in this specific space, we can see, the different podcasts that has been recorded by JSON that have to do somehow with Gennaro, and you can see that Andreas or myself, it's somehow close. But more interesting, you can see that Lily Ray is also very close to Gennaro, and I cannot understand this, Jason. But maybe you have an explanation for that.
Potentially similar topics. I mean,
That's correct.
What I would see as similar between the two is they both talked a lot about Google.
Yeah.
Because Gennaro's episode was about Google's business model.
That's correct. That's correct.
And Lily Ray says Google when she's talking about EAT pretty much every third word. And I hope she's not watching because... But no, well, they probably are very close in terms of topic, yeah.
Yep, that's correct. So, and you can see that then, of course, she's close to EAT, but she's also close to me because we had a webinar together. And so you probably combine them in a couple of pages. And so it's coming out inside this graph, kind of a tendency to cluster things and to get, information together. It's still early because we're still building the graph for you. So we don't see yet what we could see probably in a couple of weeks from now. But this is a way in which we can actually use the data in the knowledge graph to infer new knowledge or to understand new things.
Brilliant. Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing how it all clusters because actually kind of what's been interesting about the podcast, quick word about the podcast, one of which is kind of it was a human experiment, an experiment that I was doing, but it was also an excuse to travel around the world. And it was also an excuse to ask people all the questions, people who are really, truly expert on a specific topic. I said to them, what do you want to talk about most? And they would tell me what they want to talk about. And then I would ask questions that interested me. So I learned a phenomenal amount. I literally learned 100 times more in the last year than I learned in the 10 years previously. And I'm very grateful to everyone for that. And this is going to be a new stage in the learning process is how does it all fit together in a way that I probably haven't seen. So I'm terribly intrigued, terribly interested. Thank you.
Good. All right, so we can move ahead, and if you have any question for we have already seen the embeddings project.
Oh right, sorry, time for Q&A.
So Q&A. If there are questions, I see that. So Matteo has another question that I'm just going to add to the broadcast. So I might want to. We're looking at the screen, at your screen, Jason. Okay, so we see the side. Good.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I wanted to show this really quickly because this was my simplistic system up till now. The idea is that we've got an event, and within that event, I've got multiple interviews, conversations with people. And this was the only way I had of representing that, i.e. the structure of this whole thing. It's a podcast series. In 2020, I was at SMX West, and if we click on Perna, it's a podcast series. In 2020, I went to SMX West, and I interviewed Perna Virgi about how to do competitive research using search. Breadcrumbs are a great way of doing it, and for me it makes sense. But WordLift takes it and just pushes it a completely different level where it's all actually all linked together in a much more explicit manner. And so kind of this just looks like kind of baby play now, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but it's still a beautiful front end.
With my wonderful design, this is a WordPress site with the 2020 theme out of the box. Just change the background color, and that was it. So it's the simplest WordPress site you will ever see, with a very complex knowledge graph going on behind it, which is a lovely balance.
Yeah, now there is a beautiful custom knowledge graph behind. So Matteo was suggesting maybe I want to map the courses lesson first, and then I want to differentiate the how-to articles from the opinion pieces. I think that's a good idea. I mean, that's something that we can do with content modeling.
Oh yeah, well in fact, thank you, Matteo. That's brilliant. I've just started to do. Oh, and a quick word about these images. We were talking about the images, and Andrea was telling me that what WordLift does is cut a 1,200 by 1,200 image down into the different formats that the machines will tend to use, which is 16:9, 4:3, and 16:10. 16:10 isn't used very much, but I did it anyway. And what I got, I got my my designer to design this whole thing. So if you cut that line there and this line here, it cuts down to 16:9, and you get the title, the name, and my name, and the photos all in a 16:9. If it cuts it down to 4:3, you get the event and the marketing podcast. And if you leave it square, obviously you get the whole thing. So it's this kind of multi-purposed image that we built specifically. That design is specifically built for this use. And I'll show you what I'm now doing, because it links into what Matthew is saying. We've done it as well. We've got a glossary. And this is what we were just saying. We were talking about this earlier on, Andrea. I've got that same format of image where if you cut the line here, it will bring it down into 16:9 or 4:3, which WordLift does automatically for me. And I've been posting these to social media, and it works incredibly well, because every single social media post that comes out of this has a beautifully formatted image where you see the pertinent information. And the other thing, obviously, is now that I've got this glossary that I've started to build up, I can link it through as an entity to the podcast episodes and bring all that together. And the next step is I need to build the glossary. So I've started doing that. That's one of my next big projects. And then bring the course into it. And I'm very interested in doing that, obviously, is how can I get the course integrated into all this, all the different episodes, the lessons of the course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, entities in a way will be anchors that connect, the course with the podcast, right? Because if you have an entity that talks about BrandSup, I expect you to have, multiple podcasts and maybe one or two courses that are related to BrandSup. So BrandSup is going to be actually, the edge, the connecting dots between the two.
And that also means that as you were talking, I was kind of half listening to what you were saying, and the other half I was thinking, oh, what about? And that would be, once again, with the podcast episodes, I'm now going to ask myself, how does this fit in to my glossary and to my course?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, am I going to do it anymore? Which is a pity in one sense, is that it stops me expanding my horizons, but a good thing in another sense, in that it makes sure I'm focusing on my central facets, which is what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to decide what facet, but I think that the podcast will, you will keep doing it probably, with the less effort, but because I mean you produce a lot for now the past 2 years, but I think that it's essential because it's part of the same story.
I mean the other thing about the podcast, I mean, nothing to do with structured data, is I actually just love doing it. I really enjoyed the conversations, and Perna and Andrea and Gennaro, and in fact all of the episodes. It's fun. I enjoy talking to these people, very intelligent people who answer my questions, and my questions when I listen back aren't that bad. And I get people to say things that are new to me. And I know quite a lot already, but are new to other people, and bring things forward. And I think in my mind, a lot of this connects together. And I find that in the podcast episodes, I will tend to mention other people from other podcast episodes where we were talking about mentions earlier on.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be an important part of this. But I've probably forgotten most of them. And then we're going to see, if we start doing this mentions thing, all of these relationships that come together.
That's it.
And how much it all fits together. And then I will be able to judge, am I actually good at remembering everything people have said and citing them when it's pertinent within another podcast episode?
Yeah, but also I tell you one other thing that will emerge is what is trending now. I mean, a year ago we were all talking about feature snippet. We still are talking, but now it's more about rich results. So it's more about a broader set of UI element that in the SERP make a difference. So I think it's interesting also to see the transition from one topic to another across the different areas of the industry. So.
Yeah, no, and talking about feature snippets, I mean, I keep jumping from topic to topic, and it's not directly about this, but if I go back to 2020, I've just done a series of interviews with Bing,
Yep.
Bing team leads, and we've got discovering,
Super
crawling,
powerful.
extracting with Fabrice Canal, which is incredibly interesting. It's how BingBot works. He's the BingBot guy. He's the BingBot boss. And he explains to me how BingBot works and how he perceives it. And it's that whole process of discovering, discovering, crawling, extracting, and indexing. And it's phenomenally interesting, and how important that last stage is, the indexing with a layer of annotations. And it feeds into this guy who does the feature snippets for them, Ali Alvi. And I just wrote, that's phenomenally interesting if you're interested in feature snippets. He tells us what he's looking for. He tells us how it works, and he tells us what's important. Sorry, I've just completely gone off topic. I do apologize.
No, that's good. That's your content model. Your brain also needs a content model.
Yeah, my brain's getting confused. I need to be word lifted in my brain.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think we're coming to the end of the episode. I think unless there are other questions, it's been a pleasure to spend time with you, Jason, and we will keep on word lifting your website for a few weeks, and hopefully we will have a session in a few months to see the results, and hopefully we hope that they're going to be astonishing in terms of traffic.
I bet they will be.
All right. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Jason. It's been beautiful, and see you next time. Ciao.
Thanks a lot, man. Bye bye. Have fun. Thank you, everyone.